Studies project. Then there were the state reports due at the end of the year. Everyone reported on a state of their choice. Mr. Monk provided you with a prepaid postcard, and you would request information on the state you had chosen. Then you would address and mail it to the Chamber of Commerce and patiently wait for the information to show up in your mailbox. There were state birds to find, state minerals to mine, gross domestic products to learn, and populations to discover. There were so many teachers across the hall from Mr. Monk over the years, and they're setting out here now. Mrs. Galvin, Mrs. Boha, Miss Weaver, Mrs. Selly, Mrs. Pomrose, Mrs. Blake, just to name a few. Mr. Monk was in charge of teaching multiplication. Do you remember standing in the hall reciting your multiplication facts? 0 times 1 is 0. 1 times 2 is 2. 9 times 9 is 81. Okay. You learned. You were so relieved when you finally passed multiplication. Getting your name crossed off for daily work was also important, because if you didn't get it crossed off and all your work done, you had to spend your lunch recess inside doing whatever was currently incomplete or not corrected. Outside, your friends were on the playground having fun, so you knew you had to hurry. And let's talk for a moment about lunch. Mr. Monk always had tuna fish sandwiches, and the smell permeated the air as he helped you. Most of you, if you did that, probably still remember. Getting your work done was pretty important to Mr. Monk, not only for the learning, but because Friday was coming. We all loved Friday and game time, but no one more so than Mr. Monk. He taught us chess, Manicala, or whatever it is. That one I hadn't heard of. Chinese checkers, and especially computer games. Do you remember the first time you played Oregon Trail or watched Myst on the computer screen? Speaking of computers, he had some of the neatest screensavers. A little green guy singing, "I will survive." And the disco ball swings down to hitting. Or maybe the two characters moving on the screen battling each other with rock, paper, and scissors. Then there was always a field trip to the museum, either the local one or later in his career to the Museum of Natural History in Denver. We left fingerprints on the wildlife dioramas, touched the cow hair ball, studied the Indian arrowheads, and waited at the IMAX theater as anxious parent volunteers shuffled us to the next exhibit activity, or unfortunately to the bus. And let's talk for a moment, for some of you are going to remember this, about the movie. Do you remember watching the movie and having the talk? The girls all filed into the other room, and Mr. Monk taught the boys about the birds and the bees. In 33 years, the movie switched from reel to VHS to finally DVD. But the movie and the talk afterwards always remained the same. If you had the nerve to raise your hand and ask, your question would be answered with complete honesty. Mr. Monk was a brave man. The year would end with a picnic at Lindsay's, where you rotated with your team of friends through the various games, followed by a picnic on the grass, and at last, free time to explore and to play, or splash in the river. Eventually, Lindsay's would be replaced with swimming at the new Ray Pool. The last day of school came to an end when with the buses at the door, you wiggled and poked at our friends until the bell rang and we were dismissed. Mr. Monk then shook your hand, patted you on the shoulder, wished you a nice summer, and said he would see you soon. He was right. 5th grade had ended. But Mr. Monk was everywhere you could find kids. He managed the swimming pool and sold you a popsicle after making you promise to stop doing whatever it was that the lifeguard sent you in for. Sometimes repeat offenders would have to sit in the office on one of the high stools for a timeout. This wasn't too bad, as you did get a chance to talk one-on-one with Mr. Monk, and he enjoyed the talk just as much as you did. He loved the movies and would wave to you across the theater aisle. He went to the county fair every August and checked on your 4-H projects too. Mr. Monk knew your name before you ever came to his class. And he knows you today, or he knew you today, for the person that you grew up into and that you became. Mr. Monk was always proud of all of you who went through his room. He was more than our teacher or our friend, and we will miss you. Goodbye, Mr. Monk.